This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded November 8th, 2021.
Dave, are you there? Hello, Dave.
Hello.
Hey, oh, good. Yeah, we've had a lot of technical difficulties today, haven't we?
Well, yes. That's because we're computer scientists.
Right. So we make it more complicated than it should be. Well, the good news is we have a guest today who is an expert in exactly this kind of podcast because he's been doing it for a long time. I'd like you to welcome Neil Lawrence. Hi, Neil.
Hey, Neil. Great to be with you.
Now, can you help us debug? We're having video issues and also audio issues. Now, what do you do in your podcast to when
Katie does all this? She's not a computer scientist, so she knows how stuff works. She doesn't like try and connect with Linux and sort of say I have some fancy camera that has some reduced delay. No. So yeah, hand that off to people who don't know about the technology. It works way better.
Yeah, well, that makes a lot of sense. Well, let me do a little intro for you. So Neil, I guess in some ways, Neil is the person who I keep trying to be because, so let's see. So Neil was the inaugural, along with Katie, who he was just mentioning, press chair I guess press chair, communications chair for the NeurIPS conference. And when he stepped down, then I took over that role. He's also been a podcast host for a number of years. And, now Dave and I have a podcast. He's also a professor of computer science and machine learning expert. And I don't know who did that one first, actually, but I'm that as well.
Definitely, you're ahead of me because you're a lot older than me.
Oh, snap. All right. Well, there you go. All right.
Yeah. So you existed before me and all sorts. You're way more experienced.
Well, when did you first publish?
You guys are both kids.
Yeah. Right. When did you first publish at NIPS/NeurIPS?
The first NeurIPS I published. I'm sort of suspicious about the question because you may have published somewhere else earlier. But I published in 1997 at NeurIPS.
1997. All right. And Dave, do you remember when you first published at NIPS? Was it before we worked together?
Well, I don't know what I published at NIPS, actually. I mean, we published the Boltzmann machine paper, but that was like in cognitive science.
Boltzmann machine, so this is 1982, right, basically?
That's it, yeah. Well, a little later. A little later, 87, something like that.
So it's great. With Boltzmann machines, it's one of those things, it's like certain names, they come back. If it's a Boltzmann machine paper, it's either like 1987 or it's like 2008, That's this 20-year thing, yeah. In fact, we should start working on Boltzmann machines again because they're going to come up in 2028. It's coming around again.
I always felt like the NeurIPS/NIPS community was very trendy and that things would go up and down. It's like, oh, no, that was so 5 years ago. It's like, no, it's 2 years from now. But you have to be with both. The cool kids.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, certainly Boltzmann machines have never gone away as far as the math people are concerned. They just love coming up with tweaks on Boltzmann machines because you got infinity to make a theorem possible. You can take the thermodynamic limit and make a theorem possible. What's not to love if you're a mathematician?
We're a great field for mathematicians because we come up with these silly toy problem models and then some mathematicians say, this is an application. People are doing this in machine learning. They want to unravel this Swiss roll. I don't know why. But anyway, it's a big problem in all machine learning papers have this three-dimensional Swiss roll with 3,000 points uniformly distributed. And if only we could work out how to unroll it.
I have analyzed the Swiss roll, and I can now completely distinguish it from the Northern Italian roll. And here's my proof. Yeah, exactly.
So it's funny, though, because in machine learning and neural nets, like those are our theory problems, right? Those are the things we boil down to try to study them because it's not so messy with the data. But then the mathematicians take that as an application, and then they make it even more kind of abstract and theoretical.
Who then takes what they do and turns that into an application?
Oh, it's mathematicians all the way down.
More mathematicians.
More mathematicians. Until eventually you get to a Fields medalist.
There you go. It bottoms out. Or Erdos or something.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
that would work.
it's possible that a philosopher might quote something from a math paper. So, there is one more move to make.
I see. It can leave the quantitative realm entirely.
Right. I'm going to write a philosophical paper based on the word blanket in your neural networks.
And this all came from Markov blankets. Yeah, precisely. It's all down to some Markov blanket paper someone wrote.
Exactly, like that. Anyway.
There's kind of three main things that I really hope that we get a chance to talk to with Neil. Because Neil, first of all, Neil is super fun to talk to. He is the co-host of Talking Machines. And whenever I listen, I'm just always fascinated by, first of all, his insights about the actual field, so what's going on mathematically and algorithmically, but at the same time, he really cares about the implications of these on society, and always makes sure to talk about that in a way that's really insightful and informed, and makes me feel smarter just listening. But he's just always loaded with so many fun stories. So it's going to be hard to keep this on topic, because we're going to have so many fun things to talk about. But talking a little bit about science, neural nets, how's the field doing? What are you working on right now? A bit about your experience as connecting to communication. So both the NeurIPS communication chair stuff, if that's relevant, but your role as a host of quite popular podcast, certainly on a scale of 1 to us. And then third is you recently started, you put together a paper that I would just love to hear more about, where you did an analysis of the way that, let's see, what's the right way to say it? That basically about the review process. It has implications for how we review papers and how we as a field get the good results out there and try to, keep the not completely cooked results back a little bit further, and whether we're being successful at that. And I think that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds, and you've got some actual quantitative studies of it, and it would be great to chat about it.
I can see why you want to be this guy. I want to be this guy you're talking about.
He sounds good. Yeah.
This sounds impressive.
Is there nothing he can't do? Plus, the British accent, man. Like you can always get like 10 IQ points just for that. Yeah.
It took like 10 years to perfect before,
Really
I was born in New Jersey, and that's true. I was born in Morristown, New Jersey.
Is that right?
Really?
Dave and I met in Morristown, New Jersey. That's where we worked together. That's why we're,
that's how we're connected.
It all comes back to Morris. Okay, so how were you born in Morristown?
Morristown Memorial. Yeah, I think in the normal way, just
by all reports.
Nothing miraculous about it. It happened that my dad was working. He worked for Exxon, whose headquarters in those days was in Florham Park. And he just started working with them. He used to work before that. He worked for Atomic Energy of Canada, so he did all the good stuff, nuclear oil, and then he came back to the UK because they'd been in Canada. They emigrated to Canada for a few years in Toronto and then Trois-Rivières, and then they came back to the UK because they wanted to live their life in the UK. And he started working for Esso, and they immediately sent Esso is Exxon in the UK.
Yeah. Well, it was Southern Oil in the US before it became Exxon.
Standard Oil.
Standard Oil. Is that right?
Standard.
Oh, Standard Oil. That makes a lot more sense.
So I think Exxon is it's Exxon Standard Oil of New Jersey, and there's another one that was Standard Oil. Yes, but it was split like the Baby Bells. Anyway, he worked for Exxon that were in Florham Park, and I was sort of born like a few months into their assignment there, and then they went back to the UK again.
So where did you go to school?
Well, as I was growing up, I was at school in the UK mostly, but then occasionally he was sent on assignment to the US. So when I was 7 and 8, I was at a school called Glenwood School in Short Hills, New Jersey. Now, yes. Look, the eyes went up. Short Hills.
Absolutely.
I want to say it was the wrong side of the railway track in Short Hills. By the way, that mall is not in Short Hills. That is in Chatham. It is nowhere near Short Hills. They are just using the name. In an effort to raise the.
I am so excited because you're sort of well known for having snobby views of the UK, but you also have snobby views of New Jersey, which I find much more relatable. That's a lot tougher.
Yeah.
Hey, look, there's a whole thing going on in that part of New Jersey.
This completely resonated with me because I worked at Belcourt with Dave in Morristown for a bunch of years. And then we all got scattered.
Park in Chatham.
Right, exactly. And then I came back and worked at AT&T Labs in Chatham Park in the Exxon. It was the
complex.
The complex that was built for Exxon, and it might have been Exxon Mobil by the time we were there. It's now for the New York Jets. But
is it New York Jets? Because I played softball there. There was a lot of land around that. But wait, were you in Building 101?
We had I don't remember any building numbers.
This is Bell Labs, right?
No, I was never at Bell Labs. I was always at places that had just stopped being Bell Labs. So when Bell Labs people talk about the great old days of Bell Labs,
but it was what was Bell Labs. Yeah. So I think I did an assignment, and that's where Exxon Central Services used to be, and it was a big room and had a big computer, and everyone told me that it was like bomb-proof or something. And I did. My dad organized when I was a certain age to go and do work experience there. So I've done work experience in the building you were based in, I believe, because I think that became Bell Labs and became the thing. Wow.
Wow. Well, in Morristown, Dave and I were in the Y building, which is a good place to ask questions.
The YMCA,
shaped like a Y. No. It had three.
See, most Brits wouldn't get that reference. The Y building. I would think the Y. No, so but you were on the Y. You weren't working at the Y.
With the Y building, yeah.
To this day, sometimes I have nightmares about getting lost in an office building, and it's always that building. And I'm always.
But it was Y-shaped, Dave.
I know. So it was wrong. So it was 120 degrees at the center instead of 90, and I would just go around and around and around. It's terrible.
Did you end up like, I don't know? Have you worked on loop closure in robotics as a result at all?
No, I haven't, because I really want to let the nightmares go as much as possible. This is the podcast you should be doing. And when did you first decide to work on loop closure in robotics? Let me tell you about this. Exactly. It goes right back to some of the darkest times. Get lost in this building. But how about for you? When did machine learning come up on your radar?
Right. So I sort of was I really loved engineering. Like my dad, he was an engineer. He did these amazing things. He had an amazing career. And I kind of was very into building stuff as a kid. And I sort of really wanted to be an engineer like my dad. So he did mechanical engineering and I did mechanical engineering at university. And then when I started looking around for jobs, they all paid not very much and seemed to be for companies that had passed their sort of best years. So great names of companies like Rolls-Royce and all this, all your jobs were in these companies, but they paid relatively little, even compared to chemical companies like my dad worked for. So I ended up working on an oil rig. So for a company called Schlumberger, doing wireline logging, which is data acquisition. And used to sit on these rigs. And in those days, like you didn't have the internet, certainly not on oil rigs. And I used to read things like the New Scientist, and they were talking about these neural network things. And I was actually doing a lot of data acquisition, and I had to try and work out, so the sensors that you had, they measure formations, and you're trying to measure like what is the lithography, which I think means the type of rock, then the porosity and permeability of the rocks, and whether or not it contained oil, what it contained. And that was measured by a number of tools, including density tools, conductivity tools, porosity tools that fired like neutrons at the formation. And then these were all mixed together. And then the geologist would sort of say, so that's limestone and it doesn't have oil in it. And I thought that was fascinating. And they watched these lines move around. And I started reading about these neural network things that this was sort of 1980s. So this was like just the post. So it was 1990s, but it was 1994 when I started that job. So there was somehow, it was like the first wave of neural networks, and they were exciting. So I decided
was in the air, sure.
Yeah. And so then I wanted to work on those. So I went and I got no time off on the rig. So I thought I'll do a PhD instead. and went to do a PhD.
It's a common path.
You didn't actually replace the geologist with a neural net, as far as
not yet, but it's my ongoing ambition. The autogeologist. Actually, probably they've got systems that do that now. I think the worst thing I was told so this is one of those sort of things that really sticks with you. When I started training school there, I always knew I wanted to do research, and I asked about Schlumberger research. Happened to be based in Cambridge, UK, and I said, "Oh, and is there a path for field engineers to get to Schlumberger research?" And the head of the school, whose name I still remember, but I won't mention it, it still sticks in me, said, "Those people are really intelligent. There's no room for you to get from your job as a field engineer." So that's sort of those heights.
Oh, wow.
With me. Still remember that.
Well, that's nice. I mean, I certainly, since I came up through computer science and in a computer science department and so on, rather than a computer engineering department, I spent, pretty good decades being kind of snooty about science compared to engineering. And I feel like I'm sort of trying to do affirmative action these days on behalf of engineering and the systems view of things against computer science and algorithms these days to try to kind of make up for that.
I'm still working out all these divisions within computer science and trying to work out who I'm offending when I say stuff, because I came to it so late. And also, like, when I did end up in a computer science department as a lecturer, I felt so out of place. I ended up buying the compiler's book, the Dragon one, putting it on my shelf to try and look more like a computer scientist, because I thought I should. Little did I know I just had to sit there and wait, and then the whole field will turn out to be about machine learning. But like in 2001, actually, Michael, you sort of, because you were at Rutgers then, weren't you?
2001,
in CS,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Did you feel out of place in a computer science department then? Because a lot of people were in signal processing. And I think the US was further ahead than Europe in adopting ML in CS department.
Yeah, no, I've always been a computer scientist. So in fact, when I studied computer science as an undergrad, and then I got this position working in Dave's group, the group that Dave was in at Belcore. And the thing I loved about that is I thought that I would stop being a computer scientist and start to be a cognitive scientist. And the group was called the Cognitive Science Research Group.
Science.
Yeah. And we had basically half computer scientists and half psychologists, or, sort of cognitive science, behavior-based folks. And, it didn't take too long for me to realize that I love hanging around with psychologists, but I'm a computer scientist, right? Like I could talk to Dave and the other people, I would love to listen to them, but there wasn't as much to talk about. It was the concerns, and what became the actual core question was different if you're trying to understand people or if you're trying to understand processes.
But when did that separate? I mean, when did cognitive science and computer science really separate?
I mean,
I don't know if they were ever really together.
Yeah.
At least.
But there's this sort of period, like you go back to like the cybernetics era. They come out of the same like 1940s. Yeah. That's fair. There's people emerging out of those two fields then, right?
Yeah, but then it started raining money on digital computers. And that's where the split, I think, happened. And
that rain fell mainly in the United States. The raining money never really came in.
Well,
that storm passed over. Something went on the Atlantic.
The UK's rain is all filled up already.
We just had the regular rain. Just raining money thing.
But the AI winter hit both, right? Like the
AI winter in the UK has this very odd history because there's something called the Lighthouse Report.
Yeah, exactly.
Light Hill.
That sounds better.
Light Hill House. Yeah. Light Hill House. That's one of the things. I know a lot of stuff, but I always get it slightly wrong. Nice. So
it's to keep people from feeling too miserable next to you. You just got to put a few little errors in there to
just
make
a few little errors just to show,
humanity.
And the Light Hill Report, I think, was 1970s, but it came from this, and I don't know all the details. From Donald Meeke who's coming out of Bletchley Park, was I think in Edinburgh at the time. There was some falling out between professors at the University of Edinburgh And then one of them had been using research. I think this is the story. And then one of them been using their research funding on contract stuff, and the other one told on that one. And then there was an argument.
AI suffered somehow.
And then basically they called in this guy Lighthill, who wrote this report that's actually sort of quite right. He says there's nothing in AI that it couldn't be done. I mean, it's very interesting, because I still think this is true today. There's nothing in AI that couldn't be done in another field, or isn't being looked at, or couldn't be done in electrical engineering or something like that. And so then all the funding got cut. And this was before I think that happened in the US. So we sort of had an early winter. But the interesting thing about that statement is, yeah, but that's true of everything. Like physics could collect, it's like you could say that about any field. There's nothing done in any field.
Will be done in any of those other fields.
And it's much more about, like, is there a shared philosophy? What's the sort of objective of the community? And I'm not a big fan. I don't like the term AI. And actually, I'm a sort of cyberneticist at heart. I like the I see the field as going back to the sort of 40s and sort of Wiener and McCulloch and Pitts and the equivalent people in the UK. And I think that AI was a rewriting of that history. But I do think that there is something sometimes to terms that bring people together in a way. Yeah, sure, of course they're using the same maths, but that's because only certain math works, So we all end up using, it's like, yeah, just because we're all using screwdrivers doesn't mean that we're all making a car, And there's a lot of that. Why are you doing this stuff? So the Lighthill's report's a big incident, and there was a debate. It was a whole public debate and all sorts. Yeah.
And, in the 1980s, when we were doing connectionism, that was explicitly and avowedly not AI. As far as the AI people were concerned, we were shunned like that, which was fine. And we wore our chip on our shoulder proudly and so forth. Exactly. But then,
and I look back at it, and as a result, part of me, that's one of the things I think that's the heart why I really don't like the use of the term. And then when I look back and see that in many respects, the term was being used, for reasons that were quite interesting, to rebrand the field of cybernetics in a new direction, to be owned by a new group of people who then did that to our community. So yeah, I have a lot of trouble with the term. But
certainly to me, AI, good old-fashioned AI, the whole point of it was symbols. The whole point of it was presuming a symbolic representation that you didn't have to implement. You didn't have to actually account for it in a physical system sense. You could just have a pointer. You could just have a GenSym, GO23, and that means block or whatever it is. That is useful. That's like, coming down from the sky, trying to build structures among the sky, saying, those peon engineers will eventually put an implementation underneath them for us like that. And it was possible to do a little bit than that. But it turns out, it seems to me, that it's only possible to do a little bit in that abstract, pure, unimplemented kind of way. And connectionism and all the way back to cybernetics, all the stuff that's systems oriented, embedded systems oriented, where you actually have to care about the dynamics. It's not just saying, yes, point at another thing, boom, it's good. That, once again, the wheel is turning back to.
But it's super interesting because you mentioned dynamics, and, and actually, I'd be interested in your opinions on this, Michael, as well, because one of the things that also happened is, of course, that control which emerges from that cybernetics community, classical control, as we would call it now, is massively successful and is doing an enormous number of extremely exciting things, and it provably so. And therefore almost, I don't know, I get the sense that it became embarrassed about the rest of cybernetics and just went off to become sort of like, well, here's a real subject, doesn't have the word cyber in it. But somehow we've lost that connection to that critical field. And yeah, Michael, this is more your area than mine, but it feels like something that we really need to be reconnecting with because it's such a fruitful interface.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But this migration away, I think, is common, certainly in the rest of AI as well. Like when something is successful, it stops being AI, right? It stops being considered AI. And it's probably for a whole bunch of reasons. But one of them is, well, wait, but this isn't all there is, right? This isn't intelligence. It's just solving this problem. And so it doesn't feel like the mystery kind of vanishes. But in the case of control theory, I think, yeah, you want to start really focusing on how do you make an automatic pilot? right? And it's less about this kind of general question about intelligence and more about actually making it work in the real world.
Well, and also I think very importantly, and I think a lot of the problems we're getting at the moment is so much machine learning is focused on average case, and control theory has really good work on worst case, because, you know, it's not good enough to have planes land
most
safely
of the time
on average.
Right, on a typical day.
On average, this is fine.
Of the plane lands.
You kind of have to look at worst case, but a lot of this damage I think that machine learning is doing, you can sort of see it as, well, it's about the average case. It's like, well, okay, so this is nice, I've shipped an algorithm that on average is fine for people, and on average therefore means the majority, therefore probably means the digitally empowered majority and everything else. And so I think there's a lot to sort of like attach. I don't know. I mean, I think the worst case analysis is that you normally get in control, that probably things we should be caring a lot more about in machine learning.
Here.
But usually, yeah. But I mean, from the discrete traditional computing point of view, where you can create arbitrarily high order nonlinearities just by having like 3 if statements nested or something like that, you know, the worst case becomes completely hopelessly intractable almost immediately. So therefore people have to look where the light's good some other way. And, you know, I agree with you. I think at least the spirit of what I hear, that, you know, maybe we should think more carefully about having 3 nested if statements or whatever the hell it is. Think more carefully about the nonlinearities we're building into the system, rather than giving up on considering worst case treatments of them.
Isn't that so? I mean, I'm immediately thinking, and I don't know enough about it, but it feels like in some sense verification is trying to do that for those.
That's right.
And of course, that's
right.
why perhaps it's not as widespread in software as it might be, because people like to write their Yeah,
exactly. They like to write these unbelievably high order functions that you're not going to verify in any reasonable amount of time. And, you know, yes, it's like program verification is like, you know, affordable nuclear fusion, as far as I can tell. It's always 5 years down the road.
Which one are we closer to? Yeah.
Like that. It's dead heat. We're going to get to them at the same time.
Wouldn't it be great if it turned out that that's just what you needed? Well, we could do nuclear fusion if we had program verification. But it turns out to verify programs, we need cheap energy.
Yeah, that's right.
And we need enough
only
cheap energy.
Nuclear fusion.
Only nuclear fusion could power this program verifier.
It could be. Hey. Yeah. Okay. All right. Michael, you had all these great things that we were supposed to talk about. Let's pick another one.
Yes. Well, so tell us about the review process. How did you get interested in this as a problem, and what do you see as being the issues at the moment, and how did you come to study it?
I think when I was a PhD student, I had some crushing rejections from conferences, as we
because
all
you're
do.
Totally unique in that way.
Yeah, no, it was just me, and I felt alone. Well, and as we all do, but I think what I thought was, and I think about a lot of stuff, I must have been quite naive when I was young, because I kind of thought the world was a sensible place and people had worked stuff out. And that, like, you know, I thought things like when you join a company to do a job, that they care about your career path long term, and sort of, and think things like, maybe we should have this young field engineer become a researcher, you know. I had all these naive views. And then I think when I sat on the program committee for the first time and I watched the process, I liked the process. I thought the process was good, but I also saw, well, this is clearly stochastic. Things are coming up here that when we're looking in the gray area, you know, the gray area is somehow the most densely populated area. And it's clear that a decision that's going one week could go the other, and next week. And so Karina was asked first to program chair in Europe back in 2014, and I think there's a short list of other people to chair with, and so she sort of selected me. And then we said, well, what one innovation should we do? And it was actually Karina that said, well, why don't we run an experiment on the consistency of the review process? So that was the sort of Europe's experiment back in 2014. And then we sort of did the experiment. We got these results that I felt were very clear, is, oh, look, it's pretty stochastic. And the community, what was interesting, you're running a big conference and you're quite tired.
Can you say just a little bit more about what the what you did and what the results, like the literal.
So what we did is we took 10% of the papers and we split the program committee randomly and had the papers reviewed twice by these two independent program committees. And the idea was, well, what decisions will they make? And there was quite a lot of work to set up. And then at the end, it's quite a lot of work to run a conference, even when it seemed big at the time, but it's minuscule compared to now.
It got bigger, yeah.
It got bigger, yeah. Actually, and we were lucky in some sense because we were at this weird time, 2014, when the number of attendees had blown up. The number of papers hadn't yet blown up. Papers was going up 10% a year at that point, and attendees was growing up like way more than that. And then there was a lag, and then the papers went flying up as well. So we didn't have the burden that people coming shortly after us did. And we also didn't have, by the way, people sort of say, oh, well, it's this whole problem of the explosion of the community. No, it was just a growing community at 10% at the time we were doing it. And so what then we found out was that I think 20% of the decisions were inconsistent. So like, if you compare the two committees and the percentage there, but then people did a bit of statistics on it and said, well, this means that 50% of the papers at the conference, if you reran the conference again, would be different, which is sort of roughly true. But actually, if you analyze the statistics, there's a wide error bar on that because you end up, once you're doing the selected papers, it's 10% papers, about 170 papers. Now you're doing selected papers, which is about 25%. So you're down to about 42 papers or something like that. And you're looking at an experiment on 42 papers, right? So now you've got a bit of, it's actually between like 33 and 64%. But not that I spent a lot of time with this data. But
wait, I think Dave had a question.
Yeah, no, Dave, so this was the percentage that actually went accept in one committee and reject in the other committee. Is that with the inconsistency?
Yeah, that in effect, the inconsistency, the 50% one is that one. So the percentage that, like, if you looked at one committee, the other committee had an opposite decision. That's the 50% one. If you look at the for the accept papers only, then if you look at the papers where the two committees made different decisions overall, it's 20% of the papers. Which is actually, so Karina guessed 20% before the conference. I guessed 25%, or it was the other way around. And so it came out in line with our expectations. But people sort of freaked out about this. And then they did a lot of fixing. So my whole thought was, oh, well, once you show that people this is true, maybe they'll stop freaking out about conferences and making out that it's such a big deal, whether you get accepted or rejected. No, they just freaked out even more about trying to make the whole thing consistent. And I found that quite depressing. And we tried to write something up, but we were just tired. We never got around to it. And then I guess a year ago, I don't remember what triggered it, but I thought, I was having a conversation on Twitter. And it was about what happened to rejected papers and where they went. And I thought, I've got all that data for NeurIPS. So why not I just track that down? So what?
Wait. Okay, so I need to digest a little bit. So first of all, the results of the first study is that if you were to run the same conference with two completely distinct program committees, some things would be rejected by both, some things would be accepted by both, but there's this kind of big gray zone in the middle where it could have gone either way. And in fact, some of the double accepts and the double rejects could have been like that too. It's just random and they happen to both come the same way. It could all be just coin flips, but we don't think that, right? We think that there's some papers that are pretty good and some that are pretty bad. And it's just, there's this middle zone where it's just a judgment call and different groups.
Well, that was the sort of question, because in some sense
we think that.
Well, what is?
I think that's even charitable, Michael.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the thing that we realized is that the thing that I was thinking about with 7 years passing since the conference, we've kind of got a potential indicator. We can look at the citations. And that was a very foolish thought, because tracking down citations for 1,600 papers is an extremely boring task. And when it's a confidential set of reviews that you're sort of, I didn't even at that point say to Karina I was going to do this, because I sort of thought I might well give up, and I didn't want to say to someone.
I thought I could do this, but it was too much.
It felt so important. It was a massive slog.
you were going to take the papers that were rejected back in the time when you were running the conference.
No, I thought it was
figure out.
First, it was
well, I
accepted
did everything.
papers. Oh,
accepted, and it was everything. It was like, well, what happened to rejected papers? Do they exist? Were they published somewhere else? And if they were published somewhere else, what were their citation counts?
Okay,
and
so
accepted.
That sounds hard.
Yeah,
that sounds hard to do. That no, I mean that.
Yeah,
takes,
it took time.
Paper titles change and so on.
And even for the accepted, they change. And then you got this whole process of like. So I set up some Python scripts and basically used Semantic Scholar. And actually, that sounds better than it was. I think embarrassingly, I built an Excel spreadsheet and I randomized the order of the papers in the Excel spreadsheet. And then I had an awful sort of HTML link that was picking up the paper title because I had the Excel spreadsheets from the conference stuff, and then I just sort of put in a link that should search for that paper on Semantic Scholar, and then I sat there and clicked on these things 1,600 times to recover.
And so the bottom line is the rejected papers, the building block that was rejected became
so what's interesting is if you look at accepted papers only, this is the really interesting result. There's no correlation between the score those papers received and their final impact as measured in terms of citations. That's the quality score. However, there was a correlation between the confidence that reviewers expressed in their score and the final impact, and quite a strong one. It's over 20%, if I remember well, which, considering between the two committees, when we looked at confidence scores, there was a 38% correlation. There was between the two committees, there was 50% correlation on quality. Confidence, there was 38%. And we were getting to 23% correlation between confidence and impact of the paper. I thought that was interesting because it sort of indicates that part of confidence must be something like clarity or people's.
So I review a paper. I say it's borderline accept, high confidence, and that's an indicator it's going to get more citations down the road.
It seems. I mean, as much an indicator as anything. Better indicator than anything else that it's going to get high citations. Which is kind of interesting, isn't it?
What about the rejected papers? Anything come out of that?
Well, the rejected papers. So if you look at the rejected papers, because obviously papers that are being accepted have a lift because they're. So it's a different category. So looking at the rejected papers alone, there is a correlation between the quality score. So it sort of seems that reviewers they have some capability to detect poor papers, but not a capability in terms of quality score to detect good papers if we accept poor and good as measured by citations, which is, we could do another hour on that. It's a proxy, it's a reasonable proxy. So that was quite interesting. So the point to me was to try and sort of show that, like, because one of the things that really frustrated me and still bothers me, because it's a constant, I think, thing that humans are striving for, and I think it's very problematic, is to strive for consistency. So I've got a few ways of explaining quickly why that's wrong, which is like, so consistency always sounds good. Everyone says, well, consistent. If we're not consistent, how could we be correct? So that's a very powerful argument for consistency. But here's a powerful argument against consistency. If you know you're incorrect, is it better to be consistently or inconsistently incorrect? And I would argue it's better to be inconsistently incorrect, and that this is why a lot of human decision-making is inconsistent, because actually, as a species, as a life form, it's very important we don't all make the same stupid mistake together at the same time, like flying on the average case performance plane.
There you go.
That would be an example of a bad decision that we don't want to make together. Like, it'd be fine, like if Michael goes on it and Dave and I don't, see the same data, make a different decision. So that's sort of, if you're going to have incorrectness, and we know that truth is intractable in some sense, there's no way you can ever be guaranteed that you're going to be correct. So actually, in some sense, my argument is that inconsistency is squashing that inconsistency is the worst thing you can do. So I think why did I do those 16? So I mean, to try and prove that.
Is it the case that inconsistency is another word for diversity? Because it sounds like the argument you're making in terms of like biological evolution is you want to have some diversity if the world is complicated and uncertain. Diversity is the only thing that's going to keep you from all going down the tubes.
It's bias variance error in terms of so what's interesting in machine learning is we typically erred on the side of bias in the bias variance decomposition. So bias variance decomposition of generalization error, just for the viewers out there, of course.
Yeah.
Michael and I know this. Decomposition of the generalization error into two components, one of which, called the bias, is associated with the fact that your model isn't complex enough to represent the real world situation. And the other of which, known as the variance, is associated with the fact that you don't have enough data to determine what your model should be. And in machine learning, we typically, particularly in non-Bayesian learning, we've erred on the side of bias. And people say that this is a good thing because...
to err on the side of bias, does that mean we get more bias or less bias?
Means, that's a good one. It's like
bias up.
It's like bias up and calm down, and so it's slow up, and okay. I'm not sure what it means now that you've said that. I had a totally great idea about what that meant.
You mean
more complex?
We're biased towards bias. These words are so overloaded. So we tend, I think people tended to prefer, before neural networks, back in the day, but people tended to say, well, I'm going to use a simpler model to get good generalization. And there's a nice characteristic about that, is that now that model is also sort of more consistent. And the moment this clicked for me was I was sitting in a Royal Society meeting about law and machine learning. There were a lot of high court judges there. And one of the high court judges said...
Did they wear the wigs?
No, I wish they had done.
Okay, all right.
I'm going to reimagine that. They're wearing wigs now, so it's like even... better.
That's cool.
Yeah, they've got long wigs. And one of them had a gavel, and he banged the table and he said, "Hear thee, hear." I think they don't say "hear thee." That's a town crier. They said, "Order, order." And then they said that we know already that machine learning systems are more consistent than judges. So, we know that we should be replacing us with these systems. And I'm like, ouch. Oh my God, a high court judge just said that. How's that possible? And it's like one of those, so I had to very quickly come up with punchy statements that eliminated the British High Court justices thinking that they should be replaced by machine learning on the basis of consistency. And so I just said consistency doesn't mean correctness. And if you know you're incorrect, then inconsistency is better. And actually the argument resonated, and I've thought a lot about it since then. And I kind of think that a lot of the problems we're experiencing with machine learning in society today are actually associated with large-scale deployment of systems that make consistent errors, and that we would be a lot better off if we could steer them towards making inconsistent errors. But explaining that to people is quite hard. So what we really need is a system that's utterly inconsistent. Said, "Are you sure?" "No." "We need a consistent system." "Oh, damn it." I'm stuck in a rut. So I guess a lot of these things mix up. Sorry, Dave, go ahead.
No, I was just going to echo an agreement there that the problem with consistency is that you have to specify a space, a set of dimensions that you're going to be consistent with or consistent to. And we know in the real world, those models do unbelievable damage to reality. It's not possible not to, except if you're in an artificial pendulum environment of physics or something like that. Any real system, there's going to be a tremendous amount of complexity that you just shore away by saying, "Oh, I've got a 20-dimensional model," whatever it is. Yeah. And so if you now turn around and say, well, we should be consistent in, say, sentencing based on previous crimes and skin color and gender and so forth, you are definitely going to be wrong. And so I think another way to come back at the high court judges is the subtlety of the case, the beauty of the individual case, and to not lose that in the hobgoblin foolish consistency.
So I sometimes, and actually I talk about this a lot when I'm talking to domain experts who are often overawed by machine learning and AI and its capabilities. And I think I use exactly a version of the argument I think you're giving there, Dave, which is that the human brings the context. And part of that context is really, and this is where I think that we come to the limits of AI, part of that context is knowledge of what it means to be human. And I think there's a really interesting question about, certainly in the case of a high court judge, maybe in medicine, this is somehow less relevant. But in the case of a high court judge, that knowledge of what it is to be human and to look at these decisions that have been made with the context of that knowledge actually seems like quite an important part of the decision. And if that leads to inconsistency, well, I think that's inconsistency that I'm prepared to accept. And indeed, I think it's a positive thing, because I think the converse is that you are going to be making consistent mistakes, and consistent mistakes, I think another word for that is sort of discrimination. And whether it's discrimination on a protected category, as in the sort of things that we're aware of where discrimination is occurring, or not, it's creating potentially new categories of discrimination. And this seems highly dangerous. But it seems also really complicated, because at the same time, if we're going to sort of say, well, the judge kind of just tosses a coin at this point in order to maintain the inconsistency of the system, this doesn't seem very fair. So you see this massive tension in the fairness of the system, that at one point, there's a sense of fairness, which is, oh, cool, it's a really simple rule. The rule is if this happens, then you go to jail. And if it doesn't happen, then that's another way in which things can be fair. But if you genuinely deploy such a system, then it's massively unfair. And I think that's fascinating.
But here we are. AI is getting deployed left, right, and center in domains that we know about and we can't even imagine. It's becoming, in some ways, more and more prescriptive of what counts as acceptable, or define the parameters of, now I have to learn to enunciate so that the speech recognition system can get me like that there's going to be a tendency to put me in the box that is most convenient for the learning system. And yet, so my question is, did we really screw up? I mean, did all of us machine learning AI people that have walked down this road, including all three of us talking here today, are we culpable? What should we be doing? Or is there no problem at all? Where are we?
I think it's a great question. And I think we are culpable. And I'm going to unpack the question a little bit. I don't believe in this notion of solving intelligence. I think that is a dangerous notion. And I think that what it provides, I believe in solving problems. I'm an engineer, as we already discussed. I just drill holes and try to get oil out, and I don't worry about what that means. No, but in terms of I always came into this to try and solve problems, but then I sort of see, and this is where I have a problem with the term artificial intelligence. It seems, when I try and think about what it means, I think it's giving the people the impression that we finally built systems that are capable of adapting to us, that are capable of responding to who we are and accommodating us in the decisions they make. And we haven't. And a lot of these problems that we're facing are associated with what we've actually created, which is just a sort of another way of automation that requires humans to adapt to it, as you just implied, Dave. So like, once again, it's like, oh, here's the computer only has this level of functionality. And as society, we now have to adapt to the level of functionality that the machine has, because it's not capable of adapting to us. And there's no sign that we've built anything close to something that's capable of adapting to us. Only yet this time, people believe that it is. So where they are deploying it and the scale at which they're deploying it is much larger than all the other times where we've had to adapt to the machine. And I find that kind of deeply worrying. And what's the answer? Well, part of it, I think, is we're also deploying into a mess. We're not even aware of when and how we're deploying these things. So the shocking thing about, all these scandals around social media is, I keep thinking, well, wouldn't it be great if it was an evil master plan from Mark Zuckerberg, because then we could just arrest him. We could have just pulled the hood off and say, and all along it was Donald Rumsfeld hiding under this, and I would have gone away from it if it weren't for you damn kids.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but it's not. It's structural.
It's structural and it's systemic. And Mark is an intelligent, slightly naive sometimes person who was just doing what he was told to do by the society in which he lives in. And for every Mark Zuckerberg you remove, you'll get another one lining up. He's not evil. And that kind of worries me greatly. And I think that the onus is not, you talked about systems, Dave, earlier. to think about these things in a systemic way and to talk across boundaries, to educate about how they're working and to educate ourselves about what the implications of that is for society.
Right. I mean, so I come down on, if I'm going to try to pick one direction to push, to put some sand in the gears of the bad stuff, of the deployment and so forth, I come down against centralization. I come down in favor of decentralization, in favor not of decentralized finance or any of that whole stuff, but the sort of small is beautiful, structure at all scales approach that I think, we can pitch that. We can paint pictures of that being a good world where there is community and then there's larger communities and so forth, rather than individual eyeballs and then Facebook and no structure in between. And if we can just go that far, if we can just say that's what we should be aiming at, structure at all scales, small is beautiful, then maybe it'll help shift the landscape on a lot of these other questions.
I think that's right. And I think that there's a lot of hope. I mean, I guess my big thought on this is if we can, sometimes I think of the society you're in as looking as a very feudal society because of what you're saying not being true, that we're digitally disenfranchised. And I think that if we can push some of the power, realign it with people's capability to dictate, then I kind of feel that a decentralized system like that would help. But I do worry at the same time that it seems like that's how the internet started out. And actually the forces have been to centralize. But I'm sure it'll be fine.
Well, I mean, I think the forces for centralization are real, are systemic, that, we have to fight that battle every day. And it's not something that's going to be won because there's efficiencies in centralization plus brittleness, as we have learned, because redundancy is required for robustness and efficiency eliminates redundancy. It's just a tautology like that. So, for sure. I mean, I guess, I want to say when people say something is great because it improves efficiency, that's actually a little red flag for me like that, because it means something was squeezed out. It's possible that most of what was squeezed out is most likely waste, but you really don't know that until you find the future, come back and see what's necessary. And
I think that that's when we look like at life around us, we often see it's not efficient, but it's robust.
Exactly.
And it's diverse. And if the world were a world where there's just some simple objective function that we can simply deploy and it's going to work, we would just see one solution for life. It's not like that. And as a result, it's kind of problematic when we're treating it like that at such scale. But the challenge is, I don't think we have another set of techniques for building such complex systems yet.
Absolutely. Well, geez. We didn't even get. I wanted to talk about gods and robots, which I listened to your podcast the other day, and I was like, yeah, this is great. What every computer scientist needs is a rabbi. And straighten.
No, I'm not even Jewish. It's great.
Hey, computer scientist, whatever, like that, because it sounded like. I mean, sort of the bigger picture of computing up, conversations about computation writ large as the charter for computing up. One of the things that's most fundamental about it is seeing people in societies and as computational systems, not as rigid, narrow consistency, correctness stuff, but as broadly scoped computational interactive systems. And the kind of mindset that underlies religious faith or spirituality and the whole God thing is, to me, a very clear systemic computational property. It's something that you could almost pound out. You could almost make a model of that. Does this little computational machine have that bonding to the larger system? And that's, if so, then that's religion, because technically speaking, it's about making the connection, and any notion of truth or something is secondary. Well, the important part is the connection, like that. And so it seemed to me that the direction you were going, to the degree that I followed it from the one podcast, it was very compatible with that there was going to be this sort of people as robots, as things. Am I off the wall, or am I anywhere there?
Yeah, no, I think particularly, I really am into, once you realize absolute truth is unreachable, there's a really interesting, alluring nature to the notion of a consensus truth, a cultural truth.
Yep.
And that realization for me, and I'm not religious myself, but has made me think quite carefully about what it means to challenge those cultural truths for people and groups that have them right at the heart of their being. And I think in particular, this whole chain of thought started when I noticed the extent to which the transhumanists are just recreating religion. And so while sort of going around saying, look how atheists we are, look at us, we're atheists, but
we're superhuman atheists.
Superhuman uploaded brain atheists. It's like, hold on, people, hold on. There's a number of faith-based things in coming in here, and like, let's just wind back and sort of see which stage of religion you've reached. And it's pretty old, it's like sort of, it's mostly not written when they got to this stage of religion. And then that made me think, and I think it goes to the core of the question is, well, okay, what if you fast forward? What if we skip these techno-religions in their proto form and try and skip to what I admire most about religious people, and the religious people I do admire, or the way that religions can operate? And I think that for me, that came to introspection. And so I think that there's different, Laura and I have different ideas why we're interested in this, but one of the aspects I'm interested in is that introspective nature and the extent to which we can use this notion, or this creation of intelligence ourselves, to introspect more about ourselves. So for me, there's a part of this thing out there that sophisticated religious people use the notion of God, which for them is often a pervasive intelligence, it's not an embodied intelligence, as a way of thinking about their context in the universe. And we've already spoken a little bit about how when artificial intelligence is successful, it's no longer AI. Well, that is cutting away something about human cognition. And I always have this sort of Democritan view of our cognition. So if you keep slicing, is there a bit that which you can't slice anymore? And I think that's quite an introspective perspective. You can ask that question without even having got to that bit. And my answer is, yeah, there is a cultural and evolutionary history that the three of us, have been on a journey of billions of years, if you go all the way back to the origin of life. And as humans, sort of hundreds of thousands of years, that you can't just introduce a computer on, number one, because it doesn't actually die. And that in some sense is, but that's an oddly spiritual thought, I feel. So I feel myself with this sort of spiritual thought that whether you believe in religion or not, just time past that we've been co-evolving together and operating as a social species or an interacting species with other life is quite a spiritual thing that you can't, that computers just can't nudge in on. So that's kind of where I am with that kernel. But I think there's I got there by looking at how I think religious people have treated that. So fast forwarding on the, okay, we're going to be techno-religious. Let's try and get to sophisticated religions as quickly as possible, rather than doing all the, let's upload our brains, there's going to be a judgment day, we'll all be killed, things like that.
And then after that, we'll get to a better technology instead of this 2-bit excuse for technology that we're using today. Yeah, absolutely. Neil, I hadn't met you before, but this was super duper fun. And, I would, if we get a chance to talk again, who knows, maybe the pandemic will let us have a beer one day, that I would push back. I would say programs can definitely die. In it just the fact that they have limited, pitiful lives right now is a matter of degree rather than a matter of a kind. I am a computational paganist, but we could have that discussion. But in the meantime, in the bigger picture, I feel like I absolutely agree that the embedded context of our history and so forth, and you can carve away this and that and see if there's some ineluctable nut. But really, part of the problem is carving it all away. And maybe instead we should, embrace it and marinate and taste all the bits that we're thinking about cutting away instead of cutting them away.
Well, embrace them and enjoy them. And I think it's suddenly you start asking these questions like, because people say, well, in the future, how will humans be productive? Because computers will be doing all the work. And like, oh, wait a second, what is work and what is productivity? Is making me a flat white productivity, or is that just enjoying the company of another human? And I think that's exactly in line with what you're saying, Dave, is that you can start to embrace the aspects of you that aren't about allow us to produce more steel as a society or whatever else we actually measure, and start to think very carefully about what we treasure instead of what we measure. Oh my God, that was good.
That was very good.
That was good.
Let's think about what we treasure instead of what we measure.
But I should have said that was good. I should have just said it and just left it there, as if, let's think about what we treasure instead of what we measure.
There's our title. Neil, this was super great. Michael, are you set? Are we there? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. This has really been great. Thank you for coming.
Been great talking to you both.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.